especially, was a bubble looking for a pin. And it found it in the tragedy of bringing down the World Trade Centers. If that hadn't occurred, the stock market would have fallen, and the tragedy, the falling market would have happened maybe a year from now. For those of you who've been listening to my show, certainly for the last year or two, and especially when I had my son Peter, you've heard him talk about the stock market as a mania. The stock market, and on television, who do you hear on CNN and all these programs? Representatives, I mean, they look good, they sound as if they know what they're talking about. They're representatives in the brokerage firms. You'll have somebody from Merrill Lynch, this broker. Now, all of them have a vested interest in the stock market. So the stock market went, what, from 9,000 or 11,000 down to 7,000? Hey, you know what the stock market was just prior to the outbreak of the Second War? Here, I got it. The stock market in 1940 was 122. During the Second World War, it actually fell below 100. Let's say 100. So now the stock market, when it was at 10,000, that means it was 100 times what the market was in 1940. 100 times. Does that mean our industrial plant was worth 100 times more than it was? No. As a matter of fact, if you put dollar signs against our actually industrial, our industrial base, probably our industrial base was worth more in 1940 than it was worth today. In 1940, we had a magnificent railroad system. We had the New York New Haven. We had, what was the value of the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Erie Railroad, all these railroads that are now gone. How about our merchant marine? We used to have shipping lines. During the Second World War, better than 60% of all the shipping that went in and out of our harbors were American flagships. Now I think we have about 150. So we had over 200 shoe factories in Brockton, Mass. They're all gone. In the last 20 years, we've seen the vanishing of our railroads, our merchant marine, most of our factories. In 1940, we made everything. We made all of our clothing, all of our shoes, all of our products. Unfortunately, you know, I'm getting to the point where more and more people don't remember what it was like in 1940, 43. But anybody, in 1940, if I wanted to boast that I had money, if I wanted to boast that I had money, what could I say? I could say, see this tie? It's imported. What did the words "it's imported" mean at one time? Cost more money. Cost more money. The very words "it's imported" means it costs more. Now you say, well, how come it's so cheap? Well, it's imported. Is the fact that we're losing industry because of cheap foreign labor? No, you had cheap foreign labor in 1930, but we had efficient industries here because there was no taxes to speak of and no government regulation. Now, a lot of you people simply will not remember, will not understand the feeling of power that Americans had in 1945 when the Second World War was over. We just defeated Germany and Japan. Japan was totally in ashes. It took Japan 20 years just to replace the destruction of the Second World War. 20 years just to replace it. Tokyo was in ashes, so was most of the Japanese cities. Germany was largely in ashes, so was France. The American economy rebuilt Europe and Japan. Now, Americans in 1945 had the feeling that nobody could make anything except us. We created the assembly line. We were this arrogant. We sent people to Japan and to Europe to show them how to build factories. We thought nobody could make anything but us. Everything that we used here was made in America. Just to show you, years ago, I don't know, 25 years ago, I had friends. I never did it, but going to Europe was very inexpensive. They used to go to Switzerland skiing. In those days, they only had wooden skis in Europe, and Americans, you would go there with head and heart skis, which sold for about $100. The Europeans were awed at the metal skis. They would go to Europe, ski, sell their heads and heart skis, for maybe the equivalent of $200 or $300, and their ski trip wouldn't cost them anything. They would look at the products Americans had. When I was stationed in Germany in 1950 and 52, a friend of mine lived in, it escaped destruction for the war, but it was a nice apartment, middle-class apartment. They didn't have bathrooms in their apartments. The bathrooms were still in the hall. We had a standard of living, even before the war, that Europeans couldn't even aspire to. We worked fewer hours. In America, women didn't work in America. Ask your grandmothers and mothers if they worked. My father was a carpenter. I had 7 older sisters. In those days, you had 4 and 5 in a family. Women generally didn't work. For middle class, if you had a job, if your father was a butcher or a baker or a milkman, had a job, your mother didn't work. That's the way it was. Now, 50% of our workforce is women. And women with children 6 months old, they have to get up in the morning and bring them to a daycare center. Why? Because if they didn't work, they couldn't meet their mortgage payments. Now, we were told over and over again, the last 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know how many times I heard, America has the strongest economy in the world. I heard Rush Limbaugh, who's normally amusing, and a lot of things he says, you know, are interesting. But I don't know where he is. I don't know where he gets his facts from. But he pointed out the American economy is the envy of the world. That's not true. Japan has a much better economy than we do. As a matter of fact, our economy is a failure. It's a failure. How do I know that? Because we don't make enough goods to satisfy our own economic needs. Last month, we had a $28 billion trade deficit. What does that mean? It means the average American consumes more than the average American produces. Now, the most primitive society can't do that. They can't eat and consume more than they produce. Even if they live at a bare subsistence, they can only consume what they produce. They can't consume more than they produce. Only we can do it. Why? Because the world is willing to accept our intrinsically worthless paper money, which creates a debt. They ship us real goods, and we borrow from them and go ever further, deeper into debt. So America doesn't produce enough goods for their own consumption needs. In addition, years ago, Americans used to save 16–17% of what they produced. Now we have a negative savings rate. Now, suppose you had 2 neighbors. This neighbor is building a swimming pool. He just came back from Europe. But you heard he does that by borrowing money. And he has no savings to speak of. But his father inherited some property from his father, so he's selling off what he got from his parents. Doesn't work, and spends far more than he earns. On your left is another neighbor who only consume what they then puts money in the bank and is building equity. Well, who's richer? Who is in better economic shape? This man on the right, if he can't borrow any more money, he's going to collapse. This man is self-sufficient. That's the situation America is in. Now, they talk about the Second World War. Fortunately, I was alive. Unfortunately, too many Americans weren't alive. I remember December 7th. I remember exactly where I was when they told me Pearl Harbor was bombed. I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was until we were at war. Now, for those of you who remember the Second World War, did Franklin Roosevelt come and remind us that we had a strong economy, telling us how great our go? No, we knew we had a strong economy. Nobody had to tell us over and over again. The reason why they tell us what a great economy we have is because we don't have a great economy. We have to perpetuate the illusion. What the country did in 1943 is we simply shifted from civilian production to war production. Nobody paid attention to the stock market because nobody had any stock. People just didn't buy stock in those days. If they had money, they put it in the bank. People had equity in their houses. If they had a house, they were paying down their mortgage. We didn't have any credit cards. I was listening yesterday on the news, and they interviewed somebody, and he said, well, because he just lost his job, and he has all these monthly credit card bills.